doesn't mean you don't have racist tendencies. I'm talking to myself here too. Like, I'd throw something too. I mean, the Constitution was written to protect white landowning men. Like, that is privilege. Hey guys, it's Olivia. This obviously isn't gonna be like my other videos, but I encourage you to stay and watch anyways. This is just in regards to, I don't want to say everything that's been going on lately, because it's been going on for years and years and years. But I felt inclined to make an informative video for you, something that can be useful and resourceful, but also something that kind of shares more of my feelings, I guess, which I think can be also useful and resourceful. So just wanted to say that. But I have an outline here just so I didn't like miss any like important points that I knew I wanted to talk about, because sometimes I'll just like get rambling and then like go off on a tangent and I miss things that I really wanted to speak on. But I have an outline and I still kind of don't know where to start, but I guess we can just talk about privilege first. So you've probably been hearing privilege, white passing privilege on your social medias and online for the past week or so now. I just kind of wanted to explain really what that is if you're having a hard time understanding or you have questions about it. So I guess we'll start with my privilege. Obviously, I am a white woman in the US. I have white privilege. I'm obviously recognizing my white privilege. And I think a lot of the times people will get hurt or offended with the term white privilege because they haven't, as a white person, always had it easy. And that is not what white privilege is. White privilege isn't saying that you haven't had struggles in your life or you haven't had it hard, you haven't had to work hard. It's simply stating that the struggles that you've experienced have nothing to do with the color of your skin. The thing about white privilege that I guess I subconsciously realized, but as I was doing some journaling and some like work this morning, I wrote down in my journal, I was doing like a writing workshop that I posted it on my Instagram story. If you follow me on Instagram, if you want to, it's linked on my story in the Black Lives Matter highlight, so you can look at it there. But I wrote that as a white person, that I can choose to learn about my privilege and I can choose to learn about my race, whereas people of color, black people specifically, if we're talking about black people specifically right now, they don't get to choose to learn that. They have to experience that, if that makes any sense. Like, I was doing this nice little writing workshop exploring like my privilege and my race and all this stuff in the comfort of my own home. Like, that is privilege. If you're a black person in the US, you do not have that privilege. You have to experience firsthand, like with discrimination, police brutality, institutionalized systemic racism. Like, those are things that you experience that tell you your race, if that makes sense. So that's just something that I was kind of thinking about when I thought about my privilege this morning, that I got to choose to explore that, whereas if I was anything else, I would have to negatively experience it. So something happened just recently that I think really highlights and demonstrates the power of white privilege, and you probably have seen it, the video of it, but it's the video of Amy Cooper, and who's a white woman who had this dog in Central Park, I think it was Central Park, and had a confrontation with a black man whose name was Christian Cooper. So essentially, if you haven't seen the video, Amy Cooper had her dog with her in Central Park, and there's a rule that you have to have, you know, animals on leashes in that area, and Christian Cooper, the black man, felt uncomfortable with the situation. He asked Amy Cooper to put her dog on a leash to abide by the rule, essentially. And for whatever reason, Amy Cooper felt threatened by that and had, you know, like a verbal altercation with this man. And this man, Christian Cooper, felt it important enough for him to, film it, which obviously we're glad that he did, so we can see the, truth of the situation. Anyways, so Amy Cooper called the police. She said, "I'm going to call the police and tell them an African American man is threatening me." In that moment, consciously or subconsciously, Amy Cooper knew, I'm a white woman in America. I'm having a verbal altercation with a black man, and I know that if I call the police and tell them I'm being threatened, I am believed in that situation. I guess I'm pointing to me because I'm also a white woman and would have that exact same power if I choose to use it in that way, which I don't. But she knew. It was just very telling. She knew that if she called the police, knowing everything she knew about police in regards to black people, that she would come out of that situation, or assume she would come out of that situation with a win, whatever that means. I think this just really highlights the power of white privilege, and how not to use it. But yeah, I think it was just really telling. If you haven't seen that video or heard about that situation, I would encourage you to look it up, so you can really understand what I'm talking about. But that is my spiel on white privilege. And I do also want to say that white privilege isn't a bad thing if you're using it correctly. So in a situation like this that we're dealing with right now, the death of George Floyd, if you are a white person or a white passing person during a time like we're dealing with right now in the murder of George Floyd, you have the privilege, and I think therefore responsibility, to be amplifying black voices right now, because systemically black voices are unheard, or they are heard and no one cares. So you being a white person have, I think, a moral obligation to be amplifying those voices and saying this is wrong, this needs to be changed. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is racism. I posted a really, I think it was helpful and informational graphic on my Instagram story. Again, if you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen it. If not, you can go to my Instagram. It's on the Black Lives Matter highlight. But basically it was a spectrum of racism, racist thoughts, how to determine where you are at on the scale or the spectrum. Let me look at it just so I can reference it 100% properly. So at the very bottom part of the scale, or one end of the spectrum, I guess, you would have an abolitionist. In the description of that would be, I will put my safety, health, and freedom on the line to fight for POC, people of color. I will let them lead and not try to be at the center. So that's what I'm saying about amplifying black voices. And then the other end of the spectrum is titled terrorism. So the very last description is, I would / have killed a black person simply for being black. And if you look at it, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a whole bunch of different titles and descriptions. And honestly, I think it's really helpful to kind of put yourself on that scale and be super real with yourself. So I guess what I'm trying to say with that is, just because you wouldn't, be that terrorism side, you would or have killed a black person simply for being black, or any person of color for that matter, doesn't mean you don't fall somewhere else on that spectrum. And I don't want to say that's okay, because it's not, but I think it's okay to, and it's necessary to dive deeper into where you're falling on the scale. And just because you wouldn't have killed George Floyd, you wouldn't have killed Breonna Taylor, you wouldn't have killed any of the exhausted list of people that we have, doesn't mean you don't have racist tendencies. I'm talking to myself here too. I guess just because you weren't the police officer that killed George Floyd doesn't mean you don't have racist tendencies. And I had to stop and check myself the past few days and just be what are the thoughts that come to my mind when a person of color enters a room? What kind of spaces am I putting myself in, like stuff like that. You just have to get really raw and real with yourself, and it's definitely not easy. I also just want to touch on the fact that racism obviously is not a new thing. We're just seeing more of it now because, you know, technology allows us to. You can pull out your smartphone and video anything that you want. And yeah, the racism is just being shown better now. It's been amplified because of technology, so it's not a new thing. It's not getting worse, it's just being recorded, essentially. I also just want to point out that we really shouldn't be surprised this is happening. I mean, the Constitution was written to protect white landowning men and no one else. So in that sense, it's working. And I think while we've come, you know, a long way from like physical enslavement of Black people, the Constitution, in my opinion, is still working as it was written and as it was designed. It was designed and written by white landowning men who had a, you know, agenda to protect themselves and people that were like them. And you might hear the argument from some people, or maybe you thought this before and you had this argument yourself, like, oh, slavery ended like years ago, like it's a non-issue. And I just wanted to point out the 13th Amendment, and I'll read it like, I have a little blurb of it, but it says, in the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which was passed after, like, you know, the Civil War and the, you know, emancipation of the slaves. That's a whole different thing. I have a large issue with Abraham Lincoln. Anyways, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So, to me, that sounds a lot like mass incarceration of Black people. Like, it's essentially just a loophole. That's all it is. These, again, white men were pretty much just trying to, like, save their asses, for lack of a better term. And this is what they came up with. And now we see that in, again, the mass incarceration of Black people. It's in the Constitution. So, that being said, the mass incarceration, the prison system, all that, those institutions are systemically racist. So you might hear the term like systemic racism. That's just referring to like for example, the mass incarceration of Black people, the prison system, also like poor housing situations, like stuff like that. Those larger institutions that Black people specifically can't thrive in because they are being oppressed, and it's a racist system. It always has been. And even though, you know, laws are passed here and there, at the core of it, at the core of the institution, and at essentially the core of our country is, you know, racist tendencies. So honestly, we shouldn't be surprised this is happening. Should we change it? Absolutely. It's really just a poor cycle of the systemic racism. It's just like a cycle that is really hard to break out of because we, as white people, make it systemically hard. It's a system that they can't break free of. Second to last thing I want to talk about is protesting. So maybe I'm sure you've seen like video and picture of protests happening recently online, on the news. Maybe you've been to some yourself. But I just kind of wanted to break down what protesting is, what rioting is, and then what looting is, because we've heard those words kind of circulating the past few days. So protests are, you know, normally peaceful, and I just want to say like 99% of protests going on right now are peaceful, or, you know, have peaceful intentions. We'll get to why they might not be peaceful later. But protests are normally peaceful, like objection to something that has been done or something that has been like happening. A riot is potentially violent demonstration to, you know, something that has been done or has been happening. So it's basically just like a protest, but where it can turn violent. That's when, you know, rioting starts. Looting is when you steal goods from, you know, those storefronts that like have been destroyed or like whatever, you're stealing goods from those places, and that's usually in a state of war or like extreme riot. So people are like planning these protests. I don't think anyone's planning a riot, but people are planning protests and, you know, spreading the word, getting them, you know, so people can have the information and be able to show up to these peaceful protests and marches and such. And actually a lot of the rioting that's going on is a lot of people who like pretty much aren't for the cause, and they just want to start drama or want to like start shit essentially, and they start rioting, they start getting violent, and then leave that mess to the black organizers of the protests, and it just reflects poorly on them, and it makes them look violent and over dramatic and stuff, which systemically, like, and stereotypically, people believe that black people are already all those things, like violent, over dramatic, all of that. So when a person who's kind of infiltrating the protests to make it, you know, seem like it's all a black person's fault, that violence is going on, then, you know, people are gonna believe them. And I just want to kind of throw out this concept. I was talking to my boyfriend the other day, and he was kind of explaining this to me, because we were seeing a lot of like rioting and looting on social media and stuff like that, and he kind of voiced the opinion to me that, you know, like, black people have been systemically oppressed, killed, XYZ for 400 plus years, and after essentially screaming for 400 years that you're being killed and oppressed and, you know, all of these other things, and no one's listening to you, like, I'd throw something too. Like, I think it's completely justified in my opinion. Do I wish for there to be, you know, violent riots and for people to get hurt? Absolutely not. But I completely understand why it happened. And I just want to wrap it up with, like, you know, resourceful ways that you can help the cause, things that you can do for yourself, that sort of stuff. So the first thing, like I was kind of saying before, is you have to do a lot of reflection, a lot of hard work, a lot of inner work, have a lot of hard conversations, ask yourself hard questions, stuff like that. Because you have to start, you know, realizing those racist tendencies that you have within yourself, to be better equipped to educate people, have conversations with people and such. And going along with having those conversations with people, I think it's really important to have conversations with people that you're already in relationship with. I know, like, a lot of people like to get in Facebook fights over stuff like this, and it's just hard because, one, you don't know that person usually, or you don't know them well usually, and things can get misconstrued, there may be typos, like all this stuff, and it's hard to just have a genuine conversation and actually get somewhere when you're just kind of going back and forth online with someone on Facebook. Of course, it's really important to be posting about this stuff and, like, getting the word out, kind of like overwhelming the people who have an opposing view, I guess. So I think it is really important to be posting. Just make sure you're not creating more division by getting into, like, a war in the comment section on a post with someone. Say your piece. If there can be a conversation that can be had, have it. But just, yeah, maybe think about that. I said it before, I'll say it again, you as a white person have the moral obligation to be amplifying black voices right now. Listen to them. They have something important to say. And it's not enough to just, like, sit back and, how do I say this? You want to sit back and listen to everything they have to say, but don't, like, sit on it. Like, you have to do something. And the very last thing that is, like, a, you know, resourceful way that you can help the cause is to figure out what gifts and talents you have, what you're good at, that could, you know, help those in need, help the cause, help protesters, whatever. So if you're like a really good artist, and you have a lot of knowledge on stuff like this, then you could be making graphics that people could share on their social media. If you are someone who's really good at public speaking, maybe you could be going to these, like, protests and like making speeches, you know what I'm saying, or maybe you're really good at writing, start writing something that you can be able to share with people. If you are a healer, a doctor, see how people who are being hurt at these protests and these riots, they need your help. Stuff like that. Just really think about how you can use what you have to help dismantle the racist system that we are unfortunately living in. Period. Okay, let me stretch out. Yeah, I hope that was helpful for you guys. You maybe learned something, got a different point of view. Yeah. I will see you guys in my next video. And until then, do some work. Love you guys. Bye.